I'm Dan Persons, and this is the Hour of the Wolf Reviews. Or these are the Hour of the Wolf Reviews. My fault for choosing a title that has a plural in it. I'm going to have to deal with that for the rest of my life, I guess. So, welcome to the first episode of this brand new podcast. What exactly is it about? Well, this is an offshoot of a radio show, Hour of the Wolf, that airs on WBAI 99.5 FM in New York every Monday at 9 p.m. It is hosted by Jim Freund. He has been doing it for longer than I have memory, and it is devoted to, as he says, science fiction, fantasy, and enchantment. It is largely a more literary-oriented show. He has lots of well-regarded authors on as his guests, and at the end of the show, I managed to sneak in and do a brief little review of whatever interesting film or TV show has come around at that particular time. And what I wanted to do, the problem with that is that it being only an hour-long show, I only have a little time to talk about whatever is interesting me. And I tend to feel that there is a lot more that could be said about whatever it is I'm reviewing. And so I wanted to start up this podcast, and it's going to be an unusual format. I will say that right up at the top. What will happen is I will run the actual review that aired on Hour of the Wolf, and then I will follow it up with a few more elaborations, just stuff off the top of my head, which is going to be interesting because I'm not really an extemporaneous speaker, but I'm going to give it a shot anyway. And so, for this first episode, even though this podcast is listed as film reviews, it's going to be film and TV reviews, just the way it is. And if you've been tracking television for the past 20 years, you know that television has grown to the point where it can tell as nuanced and engaging a story as anything that will be screening in movie theaters. So for this first episode, I am, in fact, going to be covering a TV show, the Disney Plus series Andor, a continuation of the Star Wars franchise that just debuted. And here comes the review. I am actually going to leave the slate in from the original recording just for funzos. Check it out, and then afterwards, we'll talk a little more about it. Hour of the Wolf review, air date December 26th, 2022, Andor, if else. Take one. I'm Dan Persons, and this is my Hour of the Wolf review. The warning flags went up when I heard that Disney Plus would be debuting the new Star Wars series, Andor, with no less than 3 whole episodes. It's not unusual these days for shows to debut with 2 episodes being released at once, just to set the hook. But this sounded less like hooking and more like dumping, which in a way it was, but not for lack of quality. It was another problem, one that's increasingly plagued Disney as it's tried to figure out what to do with this franchise set in a galaxy far, far away. The show takes place prior to the events of Rogue One and follows the story of soon-to-be rebel spy Cassian Andor, played by Diego Luna. It's perhaps the darkest of all the Star Wars efforts, at least among the film and TV properties. There's almost a Les Miserables vibe to these first 3 episodes, set amongst the downtrodden villagers of an isolated planet Star Wars loves its open markets, as Cassian is pursued by the junior security officer of a Republic-aligned corporation played by Alex Ferns, not for stealing a loaf of bread, but for killing a couple of scumbag, off-duty security guards who pretty much deserved it. As Cassian desperately tries to scrounge up enough money to get himself off-world, he comes to the attention of a mysterious traitor played by Stellan Skarsgård, who wants Cassian for his own, possibly more noble ends. And that would be an interesting setup for an opening episode. Problem is that this is stretched out over 3 episodes, and the dilution is evident. There's a difference between being dramatic and just dragging things out, and Andor has erred toward the latter. The first episode in particular is a crash course in how not to set up a Chekhov's gun scenario. Cassian is told by the bouncer of a brothel that the upstairs salon is closed for the evening. There's no payoff to that. He tells the madam that he's looking for his sister, which may or may not be true, but is not addressed again for the rest of the 3 episodes. He seeks out that mysterious buyer to sell some mysterious tech. We only discover who that buyer is at the end of the 2nd episode, and I still don't know what that tech was supposed to do. Lost tied up more loose ends than Andor has so far. I will say that once Skarsgård's buyer, named Luthen, gets involved in the 3rd episode, things become more interesting. The first meeting between him and Luna is particularly compelling, and I do like the antagonists, particularly Fern's dogged officer, are being given more depth than just being targets to mow down. But Andor is another situation where Disney has latched onto a concept whether or not there's actually enough story to support a series. I'm not dismissing Andor yet. There's promise evident by the 3rd episode. But if this season closes with 2 episodes devoted to The Mandalorian, I'm going to write my galactic senator. For Hour of the Wolf, I'm Dan Persons. So that's the review. Don't go anywhere. Right after this break, I'll be back with more thoughts. Welcome back. One of the problems with doing a review in such a limited amount of time like I have with Hour of the Wolf is that you can't really get into the nuances of your reaction to a particular film or TV series. Just to be clear, I didn't hate Andor. I did think the first 3 episodes dragged on quite seriously. They pretty much told a story that could have been compressed into one single episode rather than being stretched out into over 2 hours. So I am encouraged by what I saw. I had problems with it, but I think they're taking an interesting tack to telling a story here, and I am looking forward to seeing if they can pull their act together and maybe tell tighter and more impactful stories. But the fact that I am seeing stories that have maybe more impact than you typically get with a Star Wars film or TV show raises an interesting question. To go to another franchise, when Star Trek Strange New Worlds debuted this year, there was a lot of delight that greeted its debut, me amongst them, because it was going back to old school Star Trek. Wasn't really a serialized story. It was going to different planets and new adventures with every episode. People who were raised on the original series or Next Generation, for us, that is Star Trek. All the stuff that's happened with Discovery and Picard, where it's a season-long arc and not particularly told particularly well, that didn't feel like the space adventure Trek that we had been wanting to see revived. The problem with that is, should a franchise actually be like that? Should a franchise just be dishing out the same thing over and over and over? This is what we're particularly getting into with another Disney franchise, the Marvel Cinematic Universe, where it has just sort of ground down into the same story over and over again. With Star Trek, it's nice that they've gone back to old school, but it's also a little bit stultifying, and you can sort of get the sense that there is a deliberate effort to just reach back into the hopper and pull out old concepts and just recycle them for this. It's being very well done. It's a lot of fun. The same thing can be applied to the Star Wars franchise, and Disney has had a lot of problems with the Star Wars franchise, if you haven't been tracking it, and I'm pretty sure you have. I actually liked The Last Jedi. I actually felt what it was trying to do with breaking away from the franchise was a good idea. The fans felt otherwise, and the upshot of that was the disaster that was Rise of Skywalker. Now we've got Andor, which I believe is a serious break from what we've seen with Star Wars films and what we come to expect from the Star Wars universe. It is darker, it is more dramatic. It should be more interesting if they can tighten up the storytelling. The question is, does it remain Star Wars if it is such a break? And if it is a break, is that a good thing or a bad thing? I really don't have a decision on that. I think it depends on the quality of the storytelling and the filmmaking. Andor looks promising. I am hoping that they do get their act together and are able to tell more compelling stories and possibly more episodic stories. I had mentioned that there was the whole issue of Cassian looking for his sister that is never brought up again across the whole of the rest of the 3 episodes, which I think was a bad mistake. I presume it's going to get back around to that at some point. Whether that makes for a better series or not, I don't know right at the moment. I am going to be continuing with Andor, though. I am encouraged by what I saw. Whether it will pay off, that's for the future to determine. But what do you think about it? If you want to write me and let me know, you can send email to hotwolfreviews@upstartcompany.com. And also, you should be listening to Hour of the Wolf, the radio show, if you're a lover of science fiction, fantasy, and enchantment. That is over at WBAI 99.5 FM in New York and the tri-state area at 9 p.m. every Monday. Or, if you're not in the New York tri-state area, you can also find it at WBAI.org. It streams live, and there's an archive that you can dip into as well. And that'll be it for this debut episode. I am Dan Persons, your humble host and producer. Theme music is by Johnny Holiday, licensed through Creative Commons. This was recorded at the studios of the Kindness Institute Consortium. It's a production of Upstart Company. Thanks for listening. See you next week.